Good morning, pilot teachers and students. Good morning, class.
Good morning, sir.
Okay, thank you. You may sit. All right, we are still on forces, and we will be also discussing something on forces. Right, you see that these forces can be either contact force or field forces. Now, our process we have seen is an example of a contact and also a field force, because it comes in contact with water, and also the field force. Okay, it comes because of the force of gravity. Now, in this lesson, we'll be basically going through and then discussing something on force again, but this time it is a different force, and that is frictional force. Right. Question is, what is frictional force? Okay, who can give us an explanation of frictional force? John, can you tell us what frictional force is? Okay, Michael, you tell us what frictional force is. Okay, pass him that.
Frictional force probably is the force that acts together when two objects rub together.
All right, frictional force. So Michael is saying that frictional force is the force that acts when two objects come together. Rachel, what is your explanation of frictional force?
Frictional force is the force of resistance which is present when two substances rub against each other.
All right, so her explanation is almost the same as Michael's. Now, if we have to look at this frictional force, right, frictional force is a force that tends to slow, or it opposes the motion of an object. Now, you can see this frictional force which will be happening in air. They can be air friction, or it can be in any other contact surface. And you can find that this frictional force can also happen in liquids. What I'd like you to do now is to quickly go through and then have this information done. And I will give you some examples of frictional force and how these forces can be reduced. All right, quickly have the definition done. I will give another piece of information in relation to that force. Okay, everyone finished? All right, you find that friction is a very common force. Whenever an object slides over another, you find that friction tries to stop or oppose that movement. But friction tries to convert this kinetic energy into heat and waste. Okay, so you know that heat is the last form of energy. And in this, whenever there is a frictional force, there must be always heat that is produced. And we know that heat is a last form of energy. You're finished now, right? Okay, we'll go on to the next piece of information. All right, those are the ways in which we can, there are 5 ways or lots of ways in which we can reduce friction. The first one is to polish the object. That is number 1. Right, number 2 is to lubricate that. And third one is to separate the 2 surfaces with air. I will give you the next 2 later on. Quickly have this one done. All right, here are the next 2. Please have this one too. You finish with this. Okay, Okay, we will now go through looking at some examples or ways in which we can reduce friction. All right, looking at the first one, okay, that is a piece of timber that is used. Right, if you have to make it smooth by planing it, and then you will be reducing any friction on that surface of the timber. Why? Because okay, that piece of timber is now smooth. Okay, that is the first example, and that is in relation to the first way in which we can reduce that friction. All right, the second one will be parts of this machine which can be lubricated in order to reduce friction. Right, you see that this machine is sometimes, right, it is working, and parts of this machine will be more movable. Right, looking at the diagram here, you'll find that there are two surfaces there that are in contact. So when they are touching, you'll find that there will be lots of friction that is being produced or created. Now, if you decide to apply oil or something like that in between these, this surface, which may be sliding against this, is now on the oil. And that is why there is a reduced friction. Okay, because the surfaces are not touching or in contact with each other. Right, looking at the second one or the third one, right, separating the two surfaces by air. Right, this is, let's say, when engineers are trying to discuss or design this. Right, basically it is designed in such a way that air would be moving underneath in order to separate these two surfaces, because you have the surface of this hovercraft which will be in contact with the water. But when you have this one moving outwards and then it is kind of slanting downwards, you find that air will be moving in between the liquid and also the surface of this. Okay, that reduces the air friction. Now, looking at the fourth way, that is rolling the object instead of sliding that. For this one, if we have to roll that, okay, we can be able to reduce friction. But if we have to move that as it is, okay, there will be lots of friction. So this is a way in which we can reduce friction. And finally, you can have ball bearings which can be used to reduce friction. Right, why they are, because they can roll at the same time, and the surface is quite smooth, and also sometimes you find oil in between these surface of these ball bearings. That is why we can reduce friction. And okay, this is rollers, or those rollers that can be used to reduce friction. And as this one is, just imagine if this is going to slide instead of turning around. Okay, lots of friction will be produced. So instead of, okay, in order to reduce friction, this is now moving or rolling on the plates or the rail. And okay, you will find some designs of things that are moving, for example, cars and also trains, or even the aeroplanes. A train is streamlined to overcome friction with the air. Right? Why? Because you have a smooth surface, and that when air is moving, there is no contact surface in which this moving object would be in contact with the air. So that is why, because it is quite smooth, air will be just moving past, okay, without creating or in contact with this surface. Right? On the same example, you have rockets or something like missiles which are being pointed. Okay, this is quite sharp, and that can reduce friction whenever it is traveling through air. All right, this is your activity for the topic. What I'd like you to do is to quickly go through. You have those wooden blocks which have been given, and also the trolleys. Okay, follow these instructions and you carry out those activities. After that, I will ask you to explain or give you answers to what you have discovered or observed from those experiments. All right. This one here, one of you can come over here. You do this one, get around in a desk or a place, and then you can perform that. Enara, you and Malcolm, and those students at the back, you also said one. Okay. Okay, you guys here, probably two of you. Two of you can come over with this group, and one of you can join the other group at the back. Okay. Okay, quickly have this information, and then you can start. All right, you can start now with that activity if you have finished. Okay, maybe you can come around here and then walk on this table if you want to. Okay, two of you can come over here. You can work on this table so that one of you can see. You two turn around, you work with this Mr. C. Okay, Mark, you and one of you can come over here. Okay, you two put it in a place where you can turn and then you see the work probably up there. next slide. Before, no. Next, this one. All right, those students who are sitting down at the back, can you observe what is going on? You can come around, probably want to join these guys and then have a look at it. The surface, yes. Okay, by now everyone should have finished. Okay, pilot students, please watch carefully as we go through the model. Students are going to tell you what they discovered or what they have observed from those experiments. Right, looking at the first one, the results for reading 1 and reading 2, that is when you were pulling the wooden block with the trolley. Right, for the first one, what was your reading? And what was your reading for the experiment number 2? And explain the difference between 1 and 2. And finally, describe and explain your observations from that third experiment, that is to rub your hands. Okay, we'll do it this way. All right, the first group, you give your explanation for the three of those questions. We'll go on to the next and fourth, and then finally you choose somebody who can be a spokesperson for the group. Okay, we'll have group number 1. We'll start from this group and then we'll go to the next and come over here and then we'll finish up with the last group. Okay, let's have your explanation for those results for the experiment, that is reading 1 and 2, and also the finding the difference between 1 and 2, and lastly the third activity. Right, pass the mic down to the first group. All right. Okay, stand up. Right. Pilot students, please listen carefully.
The results from group 1, the results we got for the first activity, our answer we got 1 point, that the force, frictional force was 1.2 newtons. And the second activity, there was no force. There is, the difference between the two was the first activity, the wooden block was sliding along a surface while the trolley was being rolled. And the first activity has a lot of force. The frictional force is greater because the object is sliding across a surface, while in reading 2, the object is rolling. There is less frictional force.
Okay, very good. That is for the explanation to the activity. Okay, the next group. What is your observation from those experiments? Okay. Okay. Okay, is this group ready? Yeah. Okay. We'll come back to the second group later, so we'll have the third group now. Okay, please listen carefully.
With our first experiment with a block and a spring balance, we came up with 0.7 newtons. And for the second one, with this trolley here, we got 0 newtons, no force at all. Okay, our explanation of this is that the block, it has a large surface area, and it's acting with the surface of our table here, And another thing is that the block is also sliding on this table here, therefore creating more friction. And with our trolley, we have wheels. And we have 3 wheels here, sharing the load. And these 3 wheels, they have polished surfaces. That helps reduce surface area. Plus, these wheels are also rolling, which also helps to release the reduce friction. Okay, with number 3, we rubbed our hands together and we found that heat was created because our hands, when we move it, we're using energy, kinetic energy, but the heat is trying to stop this energy, slow it down. That's why we have heat.
Okay, that is your explanation. Good. We'll go on to the 4th group. Second group, are you ready? Okay, pass this one to the 4th group. Yeah. Okay, we'll have the 4th group. Okay, Malcolm.
When pulling the block, the friction force was high, therefore the force was 2 newtons. And when pulling the trolley, the friction force was low because the rolling wheels made the friction force low. Therefore, the force reading taken was 0.2 newtons.
Okay, that is for 1 and 2. For third one, what did you find when you rub your hands against each other?
As we rub the heads together, friction was increased, thus creating heat.
Okay, he's saying that when his hands were rubbed together, he found out that heat was produced. Okay, we'll go to the second group. All right, quickly. Stand up and then you can answer. Or if you want to sit down, you can quickly go through those questions, answer them, and then we'll. Okay, Ruli.
For the first experiment, the result we got from the string balance was 1 Newton. And the second experiment, the reading, we took 0 Newtons. Why there was a difference is because the block had a larger surface area, and therefore friction was larger, greater, and because of the weight, it was heavier than the trolley. And why the trolley had a smaller, it took less force it had less frictional forces because it had 3 wheels, which reduced the friction.
All right, good. Those are what you have observed from the experiment. All right, quickly to summarize what you said. All right, all of your answers are like, in the first experiment, when you were pulling the log against the surface, you find that there was a certain amount of force exerted in that spring balance. However, if you were trying that out with the second one, that is a trolley, and also the spring balance, you will find that it will be 0. So it depends on the force. Now, you know from this definition that frictional force is the force that opposes the motion or movement. And you find that the frictional force is more greater while using the wood and the surface of the desk. Now later on, when it comes to the next force, which is on action and reaction force, you will also see the same thing. While there is an action, while you are pulling with almost a certain amount of force, but then you find that the frictional force is also acting with the same amount. That is why you have, right, some of you have about 0.1 or 1 Newton and 7 Newton and so forth. Okay? So quickly to go through and then summarize what we went through. And also when you were wrapping your hands, you'll find that, okay, there was, okay, after going through that, you find that heat was produced, right? So you know that the frictional surface, the friction comes about because of the motion, okay? Now let's go through and then have a look at each one of these. Okay, I'll quickly summarize this information. Okay, the force, or definition of that frictional force, is a force that opposes the movement or the motion of an object. And you also see that friction is very common in when objects are sliding against each other. Though it may be quite smooth when we have to look at it with our eyes, but often if we have to look at that under a microscope, we will find that there is some surface which are uneven. So in order to reduce friction, there are various ways in which we can do that. Right, the first one is to polish the object. For example, if you have to apply paint or one is to a surface, we may be able to polish that object in order to reduce friction. Secondly, we're trying to lubricate that object. Firstly, you find that when there is no oil between the surface, all right, the object will be sliding against each other. So that means there will be lots of frictional force that will be created. However, if you decide to place oil between these surfaces, that is surface 1 and 2, you'll find that this will be sliding against the oil instead of the surface. That is how we can reduce friction. Right, third, separate the two surfaces with air. An example, we have seen that the hovercraft, for example, it is an example where air is moving between the surface of the liquid or water, and that reduces friction. Right? If we have to roll the object, then sliding, then we can be able to reduce friction. So on that experiment, the trolleys were having some kind of wheel, so you were rolling that, and then you find that the contact between that or the frictional force that was supposed to be created is quite low, okay, because you have rollers which are able to move that. Okay, and thirdly, okay, this object can be streamlined to reduce friction. Right, examples of those. Right, the first one is by polishing. Okay, secondly is to lubricate. Those pictures shows you some examples. And thirdly, okay, separating the two surfaces with air. Right. Fourthly, we have to roll that instead of pushing that or sliding that. And fifth example also of ball bearings being used. And if we can use rollers instead of surfaces which will be sliding against each other. And the fifth one, which is train, which is streamlined in order to reduce friction. Or sometimes you find that in cars, right? The face of the cars are simply put down low and very sharp so that they can reduce friction. And finally, okay, you can see this subject. All right. And the final thing about friction is that we see that friction is sometimes not good. Okay, but we will also see that friction has an there is an advantage to friction. Why? Because especially when you are driving your car and you are driving very fast and you cannot slow down, right? When you apply the brakes, okay, the friction between the tires and the road can be able to slow you down safely. Otherwise, you'll be going off somewhere. So friction has some advantage of that. Right. Finally, right, our keyword for today is on frictional force. Once again, good morning, pilot teachers and students. Good morning, class. All right, thank you. You may sit down.